In the second edition of Lyrical Ballads from 1800, the first came out in 1798, Wordsworth writes a kind of poem that doesn't really show up in the 1798. In 1798, he really focuses on people who are on the margins of society, people who have been left behind, people who have been pushed to poverty or insanity because of societal injustices. In 1800, he has poems that focus more on not people so much outside of the poet's sphere, and again, struggling on the margins of society, but people very much in the poet's sphere, people that he knows well, people that he wants to be close to, but nonetheless is unable to achieve that closeness. For instance, the Lucy poems, which I discussed in another lecture, the poet is describing this beautiful, young, wild girl who lives in the forest, almost like a fairy sprite or some sort of elf. And the child seems to have died young or is on the verge of dying. The main impulse of these poems is the speaker wants to connect with this young fairy-like child but cannot, and his life then becomes defined by the loss of her. So an intimacy that he desires does not form, an intimacy directed toward youth. Well, there are another handful of poems in the 1800 lyrical ballads directed not toward youth with a desire for intimacy, but toward age with a desire for intimacy. And these are the Matthew poems. These poems are addressed to an older man, 72 years old, named Matthew. Used to be a schoolmaster in the village, kind of known for his wit, known for his songs. And the poet is trying to find ways to connect with this man. Matthew is bitter. He's going to die soon. He's lost children to death. So we could say that he's an old man who is bitter, nostalgic, and really trying to come to terms with the fact that he's not going to live much longer. So in a poem like The Fountain, we have the speaker conversing with Matthew, and Matthew very clearly talks about his plight. He says near the end of the poem, the two characters are talking near a fountain. He says, "If there is one who need bemoan his kindred laid in earth, the household hearts that were his own, it is the man of mirth. My days, my friend, are almost gone. My life has been approved, and many love me, but by none am I enough beloved." This is really bracing honesty. He says, I've had a lot of people love me, but no one has loved me enough. It's a fairly harsh conclusion to make this late in life, but notice the hard-edged realism of Wordsworth here. Wordsworth is often confused of being an overly sentimental poet, writing about the glories of childhood and the sweetness of animals. But here, there's a really hard-edged psychological realism that, yeah, let's face it, people can love us, but we could always use more love. And then he continues, Matthew, "Now both himself and me he wrongs, the man who thus complains. I live and sing my idle songs upon these happy plains." And Matthew, for thy children dead, I'll be a son to thee. So this is how the interlocutor responds to Matthew. After Matthew says, many love me, but by none am I beloved enough. The young man says, now both himself and me he wrongs, the man who thus complains. Why are you complaining this way? I live and sing my idle songs upon these happy plains. I can be happy and sing my songs. Why are we complaining? And Matthew, for thy children dead, I know your children are dead, but I'll be a son to thee. And Matthew, for thy children dead, I'll be a son to thee. So, not a very sensitive response. Like, why are you complaining like this, Matthew? I can sing and be happy. And you know what? I'll be your substitute son. I'll take over for all your sons that are dead. So it's a generous gesture, we might say, but also it's somewhat insensitive. And listen to what Matthew says. At this, he grasped his hands and said, "Alas, that cannot be." And that's it. That can't be. You cannot be my son. You're not my son. My sons are dead. You cannot fill in for my son. It's very final, hard. It's a rejection. It's a rejection of this superficial offer of sympathy. And then the speaker continues, "We rose up from the fountainside, and down the smooth descent of the green sheep track did we glide, and through the wood we went. And ere we came to Leonard's Rock, he sang those witty rhymes about the crazy old church clock and the bewildered chimes." What an odd ending. So at the end, Matthew does enter into a kind of song, but it's witty, but it's about the crazy old church clock, suggesting that there's a craziness to time itself. It doesn't seem to be a very pleasant song. About the crazy old church clock and the bewildered chimes. The chiming of time are bewildered, just like Matthew. So Matthew seems to be projecting onto time itself his feeling of craziness. He's out of sync with the world, and also his bewilderment. And there's a similar psychological realism in another important Matthew poem called Two April Mornings, where Matthew goes into a long confession about his children dying, in particular his daughter. She was only 9 years old when she died, and she was a beautiful singer. And he ends this very sad speech by saying, "6 feet in earth my Emma lay." That's the name of his daughter. "And yet I loved her more, so it seemed, than till that day I had ever loved before." So I loved my daughter more the day she was buried than any time I loved her before. "And turning from her grave, I met beside the churchyard yew, a blooming girl whose hair was wet with points of morning dew." So he meets a beautiful young woman that might remind him of his daughter Emma. "A basket on her head she bare, her brow was smooth and white. To see a child so very fair, it was a pure delight. No fountain from its rocky cave e'er tripped with foot so free. She seemed as happy as a wave that dances on the sea." So it seems like he's going to say, oh, this beautiful young woman, she's so fair, she's a delight, she's free, she's happy as a wave. It seems like he's getting ready to say something like, oh, thank goodness she was there on that day, because her presence soothed me as I grieved for my own daughter. But no. "There came from me a sigh of pain, which I could ill confine. I looked at her and looked again, and did not wish her mine." So there again, it's like she cannot substitute for his actual daughter, just as the poet in the fountain cannot substitute for his son. This is a world where things are lost and they cannot be recovered. You lose your daughter, you've lost your daughter. Nothing can make up for that. So there's a bracing honesty to these poems that again is not necessarily characteristic of some of Wordsworth's more hopeful poems. Well, how does the poem end? The speaker says, "Matthew is in his grave, yet now methinks I see him stand," or as that moment with his bough of wilding in his hand. So now Matthew's dead too. So the poem just ends abruptly. So it's just interesting that as Wordsworth makes his way in 1800 to live in Grasmere, it's really the first time he and Dorothy are settled in a house where they plan to live for a long time. In 1798, Wordsworth and Dorothy were living almost as kind of vagabonds. They were moving about constantly. And just as Wordsworth was planning to publish the 1798, he knew he and Coleridge and Dorothy would be going to Germany soon. And they get back from Germany in 1799, And Wordsworth and Dorothy lived for a good long time with the Hutchinson family. And then only in 1800 do they settle down. And Wordsworth starts writing these poems, again, less about people who are on the move like vagabonds, the more about people who are in one place, people he knows, people that are close to him, but yet he cannot connect with these people. So there's a real honesty about some of the struggles of settling and being in one place and trying to find happiness among other people.